welcome. I'm Beth Schaefer. I'm the director of the Institute for Professional Development here at Metropolitan State University. We are in our second of the series, the Modern Business Architect Lessons from the Field, getting the business to, I don't have glasses on, sorry, we changed our slide, to care about business architecture. Dean is a business architect from Ameriprise and has been one at Cargill as well, along with other stints. So he has built very strong business architecture programs. And so this getting his companies to care about business architect is well in his wheelhouse. So right now, we have two offerings for business architecture classes. The virtual one will be starting at the end of November. So we are currently taking signups through November 18th. And then we also now have figured out digital badging. So those of you that have take the course and earn the certificate, there's a couple of criteria. You'll earn the business architecture certificate badge. Handy for posting on LinkedIn. And the in-person one, the next time we're scheduled to teach that is in the spring. It's boot camp style, so folks would come on campus for a week in April and a week in May to take that course. So I think that's the end of my introductions, Dean, and I turn over to you.
All right, thanks, Beth. So again, the topic for today is really focused on the most important thing for business architects is to have a strong relationship with the business, whatever that might be. And so what I'll do today is walk you through some tips and techniques that I've seen, heard, and learned in my career working with various companies and different business stakeholders to really get them from up to the point where they're your greatest champions. As Beth said, I've got some experience at some different companies, a little bit of work in consulting. Business architecture has been my passion for probably around the last 15 years now. So with that, let's dive in. 4 sections. So the first one we're going to talk about is helping with the top business challenge, which is the #1 way to raise the profile of business architecture at your company. We'll follow that up with talking about how your investment portfolio is built, rationalized, and prioritized at your company. #3, we'll talk about visuals. And finally, we'll talk about acting like a consultant. All right, so helping with the top business challenge. And for me, this is just really helping to fix something that really needs to get fixed. So first, let's talk about what we mean by challenges. So I just did some quick research, and pretty consistently from many big consulting companies, the 6 listed on the left are really what most companies are still focused on in terms of challenges. I think we all know COVID-19. It's still around. It hasn't gone away. There's still concerns as to how that might impact the workforce, continued supply chain issues. So COVID-19 continues to be on people's minds. Obviously, we are in a state of rising inflation that is impacting pretty much everything in our day-to-day lives, as well as at our companies. Labor shortages. I think I've seen this firsthand over the last year, as we've looked to recruit and hire new talent. What used to maybe take weeks is now taking months, and sometimes we just are unable to fill positions. And so that continues to be a problem across most industries. And so that's a big one that executives are really looking at how they can address. Supply chain risks and disruptions, still a thing coming out of the pandemic, right? There are still supply chain backups. If you want to buy an electric car today, those wait times continue to be extremely long, and that applies to many different industries. Some certainly have caught up and things have improved. But there is that ongoing risk that another flare-up of COVID-19 or other things in terms of world politics, the war in Ukraine. Those are all things that continue to be problematic for supply chain. Cybersecurity has not gone away as a concern for executives, and along with that, data and privacy regulations. There are a number of regulations right now that are causing many industries to kind of keep a watchful eye. I'm in financial services. There's a really big one right now that's working its way through the cycles And so that continues to be a top challenge for companies. Now contrast that to what people are worried about, and now let's look at kind of what those focus areas are. So again, looking across various industries, then what are people saying they're focusing their energies on? Some of these match up pretty cleanly. Talent, how to deal with some of those labor shortages. You'll see digital transformation on here. That hasn't changed in many years now. Digital transformation continues to be a top area of investment for companies for many reasons, including some of the things you see on the left. Increased agility. I think that again is the result of post-pandemic world where people see that they need to be able to pivot more quickly. When something goes wrong or something changes, having agility and the ability to pivot and move in a different direction. There's a lot of companies who just have not built those capabilities. So that is a focus area. It's good to see new products and services back on the list. That kind of fell off for a couple of years, but I think companies are now seeing that they need to get back after innovation and looking at targeting new segments and really looking at market conditions and coming up with some new offerings. Looking at supply chain resilience, I mentioned that on the left. And then finally, sustainability. I think in almost every industry, sustainability is a theme. It's not going away. People are investing in sustainability companies and initiatives. And so that does tend to be an area that many companies have at the top of their list. So I run through this for really the question at the bottom is, do you know, can you rattle off today, what are your company's top business challenges and focus areas? If you're a business architect, you should be able to do that, right? Because that's our job, right? Is to understand, what's going on at the business level. What are their challenges? What are their focus areas? And where do they want to go next? And so super, super critical that you stay very much in tune with what's happening in the executive suite, down into your business unit levels, and understand it in terms of what keeps them up at night, but also what are they thinking they need to focus their strategies on.
And Dean, as long as we have so few people, is there anyone who's willing to raise a hand or throw in the chat what industry they're from and what their top challenges or focus areas are? I know for our university, our labor shortage is trying to find talent is a big deal for us. And I'm going to say, inflation as well, because people don't necessarily invest in higher ed if they don't have, you may be putting off going for that master's degree if you don't have a lot of money, extra money laying around. So I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in, give you a moment. All right, seeing none. You don't want to give away any company secrets. I understand that. Okay, proceed.
I can speak for financial services. The talent thing is a big one, right? There's been a tremendous amount of movement, right, in terms of people leaving and people coming. So, I'd say kind of used to that, working primarily in the IT field. You see that a lot, but never as much as we've seen over the last, I'll say 12 to 18 months. And so even if you're recruiting great talent, you now have a whole new group of people who are onboarding and learning your company. And so that introduces challenges in getting your agenda complete. And then at the same time, new products and services is a big one in financial services as well right now. There's a lot of opportunities out there in terms of both acquisitions, divestitures, and kind of just looking at the market. Again, when markets are down, sometimes that's the best time to go out there, right, and look for opportunities to grow your business, as well as introducing new products and services. And in particular, things like products around sustainability are a big one for us as well. Kind of a third view when you're looking at the state of business is where are they actually planning to invest their dollars, right? And again, this lines up pretty close with what you saw on the previous slide with a couple changes. So no surprise, digital transformation, right? So if you're a business architect and you're not linked into digital transformation initiatives, you're probably missing something pretty important for your company. I've already talked about developing new lines of business, new products and services is a great space for business architects to assist. I talked about talent, upskilling and retraining existing talent. and or bringing new people in. Strengthening corporate culture, that's an interesting one, right? That's I think a lot of companies are taking a step back, looking at what's happened over the last few years and deciding whether or not they have the culture they need, right, to move forward and recruit talent. Increase productivity in a hybrid work model. Beth and I were chatting about that before we started today. It's still challenging. I work 3 days in the office and I work 2 days from home. And I know there's some of my friends literally just went back into the office for the first time in a long time. And I've been doing it for almost a year now, but it's taken a long time to kind of get back up to good productivity. Now we've got companies who are just starting to do that. So everyone's at a different phase right now, trying to figure out what works best for them. And then, of course, you've got the issues of working in a distributed and even sometimes global model. So you might have been doing that in the past, but now you've also got people who used to be in an office setting working distributed. So those continue to be challenges that CEOs in particular are looking at and looking for where they go next in the future. So let me turn that into some tactics. So that's all great background. That's what's going on. Again, think about your company. What are the major challenges and things you've got going on at your company? But these are some things that I personally have seen and emphasize when I'm talking to business architects on what you need to do, right, to stay relevant. And the very first one is you need to know your company's strategies and goals and objectives and missions and visions. So I think quite often it's easy for business architecture groups to kind of get lost in the minutia, right? Into the details, right? They're doing a great job updating capability maps and doing heat mapping, and that's all great. But the number one thing you need to do, right, to gain traction with key business executives is you need to meet them where they're at. And they're the ones setting strategy, right? So if you're not every year, let's look at it from a couple different levels. Number one, let's assume you don't have a seat at the table, right? So you, like many people in your company, hear the company's strategies and goals on an annual basis at the start of a new fiscal year. Even if that's where you're at, that's fine. Get those decks, get those visuals, read them, understand them, make sure you can clearly articulate those, but then also how you can translate those into, the things you do as business architects, right? Understand how your capabilities are being impacted. So as simple as it sounds, one of the things I do personally every single year is I make sure I get a copy of every, executive presentation launching, new strategies and goals. And I refer to that throughout the year so that I firmly understand how, in the heat of the battle day by day, I'm thinking about how this is contributing to what's upstream. Why? Because if I ever get the opportunity to sit in a boardroom and communicate things, if I can tie what we're working on, even if it's at an individual project level, all the way back to those strategies, I'm going to get some points for that, right? So very simple one you can do. If you happen to be, have a little more mature discipline and you actually have a seat in the room as these strategies are being developed, even better yet, right? You're part of hearing what's happening. Maybe you can even influence what's happening. Maybe you can bring capability views into those discussions. Not everyone's there, so you can do it either way, but just make sure you can talk the talk and understand exactly what's on executives' minds. Number two, every company has a portfolio management group. Maybe it's a PMO, maybe it's a business portfolio management group, maybe you have both. But in terms of where the investments are going, what initiatives are underway, how projects and programs are progressing, as a business architecture discipline, that should be one of your key partners, right? That is a group that every year, as they relook at strategies, they relook at what projects got approved. They're the groups, right? Getting things moving, starting up project teams, making sure the financials are in place. So to me, that is one of the most key groups also that you can partner with. So as an example, one of the things I do on a very regular basis is I actually review some of those decks that those groups put out. Sometimes it's painful, right? Because if you're a big company, you've got a ton of projects. You get a lot of red, yellow, green scorecards as an example. But staying in tune with how some of the big programs are progressing, even if they don't necessarily impact your day-to-day work, helps you, again, to look back at that business strategy, understand where the investments are going, where the investments aren't going, and being able to identify opportunities to sit down and talk with some of those other groups. Very common example for me is today I have a responsibility for 2 large programs. But those programs are pretty comprehensive and they have a lot of touch points across the organization. The other day, I actually learned that a new initiative was being funded that I'd never heard of. All the meetings I sit in and all the emails I read had no clue. And I instantly thought, oh my gosh, my 2 programs are going to be impacted by this. Jotted it down, found the key leader that's going to be running that, have time on the calendar to go meet with that person, get a very early barometer reading on what's that going to be, what is the impact to me, how does it all fit together in what we're all trying to accomplish, right? So it's great. I'd say most companies haven't kind of, come up with the perfect way to disseminate information. If you've got it, great. If you don't, find your portfolio management leads, find your program managers, and get on those lists so that you can kind of see what's progressing across the portfolio at your company. And then kind of a very specific one for business architects, maintain your capability model, right? One of my favorite views is, if you have a capability model that talks about everything your company does, can you, at a very high level, review a strategy, come out of a meeting with your executive team where they're, doing an all hands meeting, and can you go across your capability model and light it up, right? And say, these are the things I'm hearing. There's an extreme focus on at that top level. So you should be able to do that every year as investments get approved. You should be able to go to your capability model and again, light it up with color coding or however you want to do it and identify where the investments are going. And where this becomes super useful is you also see where investments aren't going. So a lot of times what happens in architecture groups is people keep coming with them asking for help on things, right? And you never have enough time to do everything people ask you to do. But if I can look at that map and say, I see where the investments are going, I see where the strategies are. If I get 5 requests and 3 of them aren't aligned with where the investments are going and what the strategy says, I know how I'm going to prioritize those requests, right? And that's an important aspect of maintaining a good business architecture group is and keeping it aligned with what the business wants. Keep it in tune with what the strategy says, not with all the requests that are pouring in, at those lower levels every single day. And what it all comes down to is get on those projects. As easy as it sounds, the best way I've seen over my career as an architect to raise my visibility and the visibility of what business architecture can do is literally to get on those projects, right? You may be asked to be on this project, or you in many cases might have to say, I want to be on that project. I'm going to find a way to wiggle my way on into that room so that I can start participating in that project. Okay? So let me give you, I'm just going to talk through 3 real life examples of things I've done in my past career and how it actually, accomplished what I'm talking about here. So the first one is merger and acquisitions, right? So every company to some extent has these. Sometimes it's bringing small groups in, maybe you're merging, maybe it's a multi-billion-dollar merger. But business architecture is an incredibly powerful discipline to use in that setting. Why? First thing you want to do when you're talking about a merger and acquisition is figure out, what can they do? What do they do? And how well can they do it? Well, that sounds a little bit like a capability map to me, right? With a heat map laid over the top of it. And then what do you want to do? Well, you want to compare it to yourself. What do you do and what are you good at? Right? Now let's talk about people, process, data, and technology, right? Let's boil it down to those levels and start, making some assessments. Let's look at technology. Maybe for a specific capability, you've already got a system you like, they've got a system they like. But who's got the better system? How do you go through, each of those decisions that need to be made across those capabilities and those different areas below that? Business architecture is great for that. I've personally seen this a number of times. And generally it works exactly the way I talk about, which is as soon as there's a bit of a go ahead from the team that's kind of authorizing that things are going to move ahead, the first thing you do is you sweep in and you literally do a business capability assessment, right? People may not even know it's business architecture at that point. But again, having tools in your toolbox that you can stand up and say, hey, I know exactly some methodologies we can use to go in and uncover, what do these folks do and what are they good at? And then start to marry those things together and be able to present, some trade-offs, some recommendations. So helping with an integration of a merger or acquisition is an incredibly powerful way to help the business in something that is always high profile, something business leaders need to get done. And if you can demonstrate how you successfully help lead them through that, it's an awesome way to build a strong partnership. A second one is in a major shift in technology strategy. So an example that I'll give here is around, a major system that's used across your company. So you can, I've seen this personally in ERP systems. I've seen it in HR systems. I've seen it in general ledgers. There always comes a point in time where someone starts thinking, am I on the right platform, right? Maybe I'm on a legacy CRM system and everyone's wondering why you're not on Salesforce. Maybe you've got 25 different ERP systems and you want to move on to one. Those, again, are great opportunities for business architects to step up and shine. Because again, the tools in our toolbox lend themselves very well for doing those initial assessments and being able to present in a very logical fashion where you're at, where you might want to go, and help with laying out kind of that roadmap of maybe how you get there and make those final decisions. If you're able to help business leaders, move from point A to point Z on a very complicated technology shift, again, awesome way to build powerful relationships, not with just the business, because yes, there's always business people that are involved, but also within your technology group. And the final one that might seem a little bit out there, but is something I've done a couple times now and has also worked well, is I call it resetting a dysfunctional operating model. So in a particular example I'll give here, it's where the company decided to reorganize and they moved a bunch of different businesses and functions into a new group together and said, you're now one group. Well, guess what? They had multiple accounting groups, right? They had multiple front office groups, multiple sales groups. They had multiple technologies, and they tried to start working. And of course, it was very dysfunctional. They didn't know how to work together. So how do you go about, finding answers for that? Well, it's a little bit like the merger acquisition scenario. Again, great tools in the toolbox, again, to kind of look across all the stuff that's going on, make some assessments, interview people, learn what's working, what's not, do some industry analysis, do some comparisons, and come back to your leadership team with recommendations. In fact, building operating models, and in particular doing current and target state operating model development, is right in the sweet spot of what business architecture can do for you. If that's not a space you're comfortable in, I'd encourage you to look. The BizBoc does, from the Business Architecture Guild, does have some information on this. And there's a lot of really good materials out there that you can find in the business architecture community on this one. But that one, as much as almost anything out there, if you can help leadership on the business side understand how to make a significant shift in an operating model, again, I'd say those are kind of one of the top ways you can really build those partnerships. So those are some real life examples that I've had in my career, and I know other people have had in theirs as well. So let me pause there, just ask if there's any questions, commentary, examples, anything else you'd like to go through on this first area of how you build alignment with key business leaderships through getting on important challenges and projects.
And again, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you to ask your question, or you can pop something in the Q&A. While we pause, I'm going to say, Dean, I think I'm working on the third one myself right now. But rather than having it be a bunch of us put together that don't necessarily match, the opposite is I feel like there's 3 or 4 other departments that are doing the same business as me in a sense, or at least have the same personas and customers. that we're all reaching out to, and I'm trying to corral us all together. Like, we don't all have to be doing this work. We have some capabilities in common, and we have some places where we could share work. And but it's so hard to get people to shift the paradigm that particularly because we're a non-credit and everybody else does credit, to have people see that there's other things we have in common besides how we, if we give all credit or not. So so I'm actually doing that, and I am using business architecture to try to draw that point. Again, shy group today. They're all being nice and quiet, so we'll let you keep going on.
All right, let's go to number 2, providing a better way to rationalize and prioritize investments. And this is all about just helping business leaders understand where they should be spending money and why. So I love this quote. I've actually probably heard this multiple times in my career, but I remember once many years ago where I was doing some assessment work on an operating model initiative. And one of the president of the business line said this to me. He said, I know I've been told I have to fund $10 million of corporate projects next year, and I have no idea why. I just have to write a check for 10 million every year. On top of that, many of those business executives also said things like, and I know I'm paying, IT, $20 million a year. I don't really know what I'm getting for it, right? And so this whole area is all about transparency to where the money's going. And again, this is another really good sweet spot for business architecture. So I'll start with number 1 is, I think a lot of companies have a really good focus and kind of program around doing projects right. So this is flipping that in and saying, how good are your processes to identify the right projects? And in many companies, that process is old, antiquated, highly political, spreadsheets flying all over the place. And I'll even give some other examples, but it's really who sets your agenda every year? How is it determined what projects you're going to be working on and where the money's going, right? And then, of course, once that's handed off, then PMOs and everyone gets involved and you start to execute on that. But it's business architecture is all about doing the right work, right? So business architects should be involved in that initial process to help make sure that the right projects are getting approved. And as I mentioned, there's just many tools out there to help tie strategies all the way down to an execution plan. And we'll talk a little bit more about some considerations and some examples here. So number 1, what is your planning process? And so I still think most companies I'm aware of and ones I've worked at still have an annual planning process, especially if they have an annual fiscal year cycle, especially if they're public and have to report to the market. It's just old school. And unfortunately, financial planning has not gone agile, right? So, I think we've often all dreamed of a place where, it's more fluid, right? You're not doing this once per year massive effort to figure out what projects and where you want to invest next year. It seems like you're constantly in the cycle of planning a year out. Well, how accurate are we a year out? Not very, with all the changing conditions out there. So you may or may not be able to influence this, but if you are in an annual planning process, you should absolutely know all the key dates, right? So as an example, where I work today, every June, right? I should say every May and June, I know I'm working on what are the major investments that we want to make in the following year. I'm working with my business partners on what they're thinking, what are their strategies, where are things going? And I'm working with them on identifying where should we be investing in people, process, data, and technology. I know I have to put together requests. I need to build business cases. I need to submit those by a certain date every year. Then I know there will be a long cycle of waiting, right, to understand, where are we, in terms of our people, positively reacting? What is the likelihood of us getting money? And then as we get towards the end of the year, we all start working on, okay, if we got approved, we need to start ramping up and getting ready to execute against those projects. So if you're in an annual planning process, great. Do something like I just suggested. Know those dates and get yourself woven into those processes. If you're on a more frequent planning process, again, great, that's awesome. If it's monthly or quarterly, you should be integrated into that process to make sure that at the end of the day, the business outcomes your business leaders are expecting and that their strategies are pushing toward are aligned with that project portfolio. I already touched on this a little bit, but how does that portfolio get set? Is it kind of the old school where it's really a wish list exercise where a bunch of important people run around at a certain time every year, build a wish list of what they want, and then they all argue about it? And the person who's got the most clout gets what they want. I hate to say it, but that's probably how a lot of these processes go at a lot of companies still. If that's the case, again, another big opportunity for business architecture. If you're able to translate their strategies into capabilities and into heat maps of what's working and what's not, you can help to point out things like, you've said you want to do this, but I don't see any investments to fix this piece of it, right? And so I do think that is, again, a sweet spot for business architects. It's where a mature business architecture discipline should be living, right, in this process and working early and often about influencing what those things are that are getting into that list for review. Again, what is that process for getting them approved, right? If the process is like most, you're going to have to write business cases. And again, the writing of business cases isn't something that should be left just to business people. In particular, business architects can think about all those people, process, data, and technology impacts that need to be funded as part of that. So know the process, know who's involved, socialize your ideas ahead of time, get ahead of the game, and make sure that when it gets to the approval process, you've already talked to the right people and started to grease the wheels a little bit on making sure the right agenda moves forward. I already mentioned reviewing the strategy every year, using capabilities-based planning to help determine the needed investments. If what I'm talking about is foreign to you, take a look at the Business Architecture Guild's BizBoc again. It is kind of one of the #1 resources out there to find basic information on how to use some tried and true tools in the toolbox. In particular, I've called out here, if you want to do capabilities-based investment analysis, which is what I've been referring to here, that is a section in section 2.2 of the BizBoc. And there's also an entire section on initiative mapping. Both of those talk, give you some really good methodologies for how you go about doing a lot of what I've talked about here. So I'll pause there. Anything on challenges or ideas on, kind of getting integrated with your investments and your project portfolio management? All right, let's move on to #3, building a powerful visual. And for this one, I'll say, you've made it when you see a business executive walking around with something you've built, right? Sometimes we call those the placemat, right? Something that people carry around with them and they put down on the table in front of them and they use that as a guide for conversations. So here I'm going to give you some tips, and then I'm going to show you some examples, and we'll just kind of talk through, if we think they're good visuals or not. So, just always start with the message you want to communicate and the outcome you seek. I find it, kind of crazy how often I look at a slide and I'm not sure I even understand, why they're there, what they're telling me. And so just always start with this. The outcome I seek is to get this business executive to buy into this recommendation, right? So the message I want to communicate is that I've done my homework. I've talked to all of these people that they respect. The business case I'm presenting is well thought out and it's a sound financial analysis. And that's going to lead them to give the approval I seek. Start with those basics before you put any pen to paper or anything onto a slide. #2, clearly differentiate concepts and ideas from facts. So I see this one quite often too, where people are putting up a graphic, right? And they're talking about something, but the data actually doesn't pertain to maybe the specific outcome you seek, right? And most business executives are going to call you on that. They're going to look at that and say, well, wait a second there. Is that true? Is that data I'm looking at? Is that actual fact? Oh, no. I'm just trying to give you, be clear. It's fine to put concepts out there, but make sure you label it as a concept. Or if it's just an idea you've been batting around, make sure to call it that. And if something's a fact, call it a fact. Call it out, right? Put a source on there. Make sure everyone's super clear that you're not making this stuff up, that this actually came from a reputable data source, internal or external. Straightforward stuff. You use simple, easy to understand pictures and graphs. There are some companies that have moved more towards, writing a story, keeping it in words and moving away from PowerPoint. I don't see a lot of those out there, right? I think most executives have very little time to sit down with anyone, let alone you. And if you can walk in with a powerful one pager or a couple pages with some simple pictures and graphs and some supporting text that gets you to that, like what you're trying to communicate, I still see that as kind of the best approach. Limit the amount of text. And there's nothing worse than a slide that is so busy, no one can even focus on anything on it. Stay away from buzzwords. One of the exercises I like to do prior to presenting to a senior audience is learn about them if I don't know them well. Learn kind of what their hot topics are. What are the things to stay away from, right? Talk to other people that know them. Make sure you have some sense of what they tend to look for and what they're looking to hear from you. And in particular, make sure you're not using buzzwords or things that either they don't understand or they just are going to look at you and not respect you because you're just sound like someone throwing out a bunch of garbage. So watch for that one. Stay succinct, right? I find myself coaching my team members a lot on this one. If you actually get the opportunity to spend 30 minutes with one of your business executives, you have to remember that they're coming from 5 other meetings that day, right? That were all on different topics. Right when you walk out of the room, they're moving on to another topic. All those topics are likely as important or more important than what you're talking about, right? You have to be very crisp, clean, and succinct. Get to the point, answer questions, talk about next steps, and move on. Don't assume anything. Don't assume they understand who you are, why you're there. But get to the point, stay succinct on the message you're trying to communicate, answer questions, and move on. One of my favorite ones is keep away from unnecessary details. So I'll give you 2 examples on this one. The first example, quite often people like to put screenshots, right, of a system or a concept or something that they might have had from a system, and they put it on a slide and they bring it in front of an executive. You probably all have some business leaders like I do. Some of them really like to look at details. And then down the rabbit hole they go, right? So I have an example where we showed somebody a screenshot of a system we're building. And instantly one of our key business leaders looked at it and said, why is the data, on that picture in that order? That doesn't make any sense. So we're like, oh, don't look at the data. This is just test data, right? And he's like, well, he couldn't stop, right? He kept focusing on that. And literally walking out of the room, I'm like, this is ridiculous, right? What should have I done? Number one, I should have had a business person revalidate the data that was on there or just blur it out. I didn't care about the data. I was trying to get a concept of how we were going to present things together. So that was unnecessary details. And sometimes too, I see people putting, way too much on a chart, right? You should never try to communicate more than probably 2 things on a given chart. Throwing another thing on there, people are going to get lost. So keep the details to a minimum and focus on, again, the message you're trying to communicate and the outcome you're seeking. All right, so let's look at some examples of some different visuals. All of these visuals came from this last year's Business Architecture Guild meeting that they have a summit annually, and from a company called, I don't even know how to pronounce it, Abcam, ABCam, I don't even know, but it was a really good presentation. I liked it because they kind of walked through how they do business architecture. And then they showed a bunch of kind of generic examples of what they deliver or are looking to deliver. So let's start up in the upper left-hand corner here. Some of these are a little blurred out, but that's okay. So the first thing is this example in the upper left. And again, you don't need to look at the details on here, but let's talk about what's good and maybe not so good on this particular chart. So a couple of things I like. I see some color. That's good. I see there's kind of a legend. I like to see red, yellow, green. Believe it or not, stoplight colors are still something pretty popular with executives. I see a mix, right, of some different types of charts. I see some supporting text. It's pretty thick. It's a little busy, but overall, I think it's pretty well presented. The title, Playback Per Leader, looks like they're developing something specific for specific leaders so that it's much more it's personalized for the person who's going to be looking at it. So overall, I think this looks like a pretty good kind of visual that your audience may be looking for. This might be a scorecard of some sort. You're going to have to know your own business audience if they like those kind of scorecard formats. So that one looks pretty good to me. Let's take a look at cross-functional priorities. This one I love, and there's no data on it, right? So they took my example to heart, and they didn't even put in this particular example, but you can imagine in your company that you have various functions. You can see on here, they got marketing, R&D, some various functions. But remember what my last part of the presentation, I said, you need to know what their strategies, what their challenges are, and what their priorities and focus areas are. Now, you probably have all kinds of those, right, across your different functions and businesses, but do you have a map where you lay those all out together? So this is a very powerful type of a business architecture artifact that you can develop that helps you to understand the big picture across all. But imagine being able to sit down with various business leaders and say, hey, by the way, here's where this fits in. And hopefully you're aware, these are the other priorities we're working on. And then you can imagine even doing some deeper dives across some of these to show some relationships, how, you can see color coding here. Maybe there's some examples here where, marketing has 4 different, priorities. R&D has these 2, but maybe there's some relationships here that we call out either in a different diagram or even on this chart. So this is a type of visual that I've used in the past, really to get that kind of enterprise-wide view of strategies or priorities or just initiatives that people are focused on. In the lower left, this one here they call impact by function and site. So it looks like here again they're looking across different functions on the left. On the right is just, it looks regional to me or global. And what they're doing here is they're assessing, if I look at the programs in a given area, how much impact will this have? I don't quite understand, their X and Y axis here, core versus initiative. But again, these are very powerful charts that I've used many, many times. We call it a rubric often, where we take all of our stuff, we lay it out, and then we look at impact. And usually in most of these, it looks like this, where any things that fall in the upper right quadrant are the heavy hitters, right? They have the most impact, both from a change perspective, but also maybe from a complexity and cost to implement and how many resources are needed. And so as business architects, guess where you should be focusing? Quite often it's in that upper right, the stuff that has the most bang for the buck. I shouldn't say it's actually not true. The things that have the most powerful aspect to transform, but also need the most scrutiny and help to get you there. In the lower left, over here on the high impact, but maybe low complexity, you may have some low-hanging fruit, some things that are easy to do. So just suffice it to say, this is a great, type of visual that again, it is a good one to just kind of validate with your business audience that they see things the way you are seeing things. In the middle, again, just I don't know particularly what this view is, but it looks a lot what most capability views look like. So you have a list of level 1s, level 2s, maybe level 3 capabilities, and then some level of heat mapping that helps you call out something that is of interest to you. So I do find these types of diagrams quite useful. I'd say most of the time, if I show them to an executive audience, they don't really care, just to be honest. But I do think it's something every business architecture group needs to develop within architecture, if you're working with technology on tech enabling some of these capabilities, maybe you're working with trying to prioritize across these, maybe there's different cuts of this. The danger always is when you've got 40 or 50 boxes on a slide, it's pretty hard. This might be an example again where you have the detail, but then you do call outs, right? You call out the reds and why they're red and what's important to you. And down in the lower right, there's another similar kind of heat map. In this particular example, they're laying out all their initiatives, and then they're kind of doing it across a chart where they can get a little bit more specific, maybe on impacts by, whether it's by a site or a region, or across a different functional line. Final one on this graph is one I've seen a lot of really mature business architecture practices that various companies do, where they try to build the holy grail of business architecture, which is I can map all the way down from my business model and my strategies down through my capabilities to my value streams, and then to the tech portfolio, maybe even into an org chart, down to a process organization. This is what a lot of us try to achieve. Do business executives care about this? Probably not. So again, this is an example of one that I think is super powerful for us to focus on and try to build out, but more for our own good. Maybe there's extracts from here that you want to pull out and share with certain folks. But overall, I do find these tend to be a bit academic, powerful for our own uses, but probably less impactful to a business audience. So I'll pause there. Any thoughts on visuals, anything to add, anything you've seen in your own worlds that has worked or not worked for you?
Just so that you know, Dean, we got about 8 minutes left. I'm not seeing any hand raise or Q&A. I will say I really appreciated on that last bit where you said, these are the ones that are good for business architects to know, to keep on track. And these are ones that the business appreciates, because it's not always the same thing. So thank you.
Exactly. There's a fine line between what we care about and what other people care about. All right, final one, act like a consultant. Of course, the caveat here is if your leadership loves consultants. And most business leadership seems to love consultants, whether it's bringing in McKinsey to look at a new business strategy or any of the other big ones. Funny little Dilbert, and you always do need to recognize that some consultants, there is a bad connotation to consultants as well, which is they're in it for it to make money. And you do need to recognize that. But it's also the advantage you can bring by becoming your own consulting group within your company. So let's first just quickly look at why do leaders hire consultants. The primary reason is generally they're looking for an outside perspective from someone who has experience in your industry. So no matter how great they think you are and all the people in your company are, they're always looking to say, is there someone else who's looked at other companies, my peers, my competitors, and can bring some of that experience in. Okay? And of course, the other one is they want an unbiased view. No matter what we say, we are biased. We work in a company, we've seen things. You bring someone in off the street, yes, they're going to have some bias, but it's not going to be that political bias that oftentimes our executives are looking to avoid when they're bringing consultants in. Sometimes it's bringing specialized skills. Maybe there is no one in your company that knows something. That's a little bit different use case. And of course, the fourth one is they just need extra resources. Maybe they've lost some key leaders. Maybe they just don't have enough people to work on something, so they bring in consultants. So primarily, I'm going to talk about the top two and maybe a little bit about that third one. So when you bring in consultants, what are those great skills that consulting companies look for and our companies look for when they're bringing in consultants? So this stuff you probably all know, right? But I think the thing I've seen myself the most and I've researched is good listening skills. A successful consultant is one who walks in and is a great listener, right? They spend more time listening than talking. They walk away. They synthesize that. They understand it. They replay it. So really, really effective listening skills. They're also all very good at building relationships and trust. And that's something, actually, both of these first two are key things for you as business architects. Your ability to build solid relationships and build up that trust, it's a great skill that most consultants have. Of course, good verbal and written communication skills, adaptable, fast thinker, willingness to challenge the status quo, right? You have to be willing to go out there and say, I'm sorry, but the way we've done it for 5 years is terrible, and here's why. You do need to have that industry knowledge, be organized, confident, and assertive, right? I don't see a lot of passive, poor communicating business architects have a lot of success getting into the boardroom. Persistent, right? They may tell you no 5 times, but guess what? Consultants will keep coming back and asking for a foot in the door. And sociable, being friendly, just simple things like that. Somebody that they're interested in just talking to casually. So if you can become a valued resource within your organization that can act like consultants do, that's a great way to strengthen partnership with the business. In a couple different cases, I've had times where people have come to me and said, Dean, we need you to go do this, right? We could go hire a consulting company, but you know what? We know you can do this. And the fact that you are internal is a benefit. And the fact that you've done this before is a benefit. And you're probably cheaper than bringing in McKinsey, right? So that I think is a good goal to try to achieve. All right, with that, let's wrap things up. So just some parting thoughts for you. Number one, in everything I've talked about, don't worry about the term business architecture. Anyone who's heard me talk before, I say this probably every presentation. Some companies don't use the word business architecture. You shouldn't care about that, right? Do good work, make sure people know who you are, where you fit in the organization, and what you're really good at. Don't worry that they know it's business architecture. You can throw that in, but again, they're not going to care that you call it that. But make sure they know you're doing it, right? And this is what's really important. If they don't know you're the one doing it and the successful behind the scenes, you're not tooting your own horn. They're not going to remember it's you and come back to you. Don't be overly academic. Focus on business outcomes over artifacts. In business architecture teaching, we teach you a lot of process and a lot of how to develop artifacts. But at the end of the day, that's not what your business leaders pay you for, right? They want outcomes. You need to translate all that tools in the toolbox and all the stuff you're building into a message that resonates with them. And be flexible. Help out wherever you can. I see way too many business architects only want to do certain things. I have taken on many projects and initiatives in my career that really didn't feel like business architecture, and they probably weren't. But guess what? I brought my business architecture hat in, I brought those tools in, and I delivered what was needed. So I was 50% business architect and 50% business person helping to get the job done. So I think that's just an important lesson. If you want to build strong partnerships with the business, jump in, dive in, grab whatever you can, and help move that forward. And finally, just be a good communicator. So with that, thanks for joining us. Any parting thoughts, Beth?
I did note that we have a lot of government folks with us today, and I will just say again I think the term business architecture it's even more detrimental in government because we're not business, right? And so to even introduce sometimes the business language or the corporate language creates an issue. So I just really echo, use the tools and do the work. And don't worry about what it's called or worry about keeping, as you say, don't worry about the artifacts, just do the results. So wholehearted. While we do our wrap up, last call for Q&A or raise your hand, whichever, throw something in the chat, however you want to make a comment or ask a question. And then to know that next month is the last in this series. Oh, sorry. And again, don't have glasses on. The Modern Business Architect, Lessons from the Field. So business architecture, still an emerging profession. And then I think you throw in the disruption of the pandemic, and it's lots of new things for us to consider around business architecture and how to practice it. So any other promotion you want to do for that, Dean?
No, I think it probably speaks for itself. I mean, business architects aren't on an island, right? There's solution architects, enterprise architects. That's our topic is different ways you can work better across the various architecture teams at your company.
Great. All right. Seeing no questions, thank you, audience, for joining us today. And I think that's it. Thank you, Dean. I learned a ton. So busy taking notes. So I plan on using what you've shared with us. So thanks.
Have a good day, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.